Welcome back. Now we want to talk to a geologist because if we're going to be talking about these soils, we need to understand a little better what separates one soil from another. So we're going to bring in a geologist, but it just turns out that Wayne Belding is also a master sommelier. So we're going to make him wear both hats while we talk to him. We are going to talk to Wayne in just a second, but first off, I wanted to remind you of what this area looks like. This is, of course, the entirety of Beaujolais. The crus are up in the north, and what really distinguishes the soils in the north from the soils in the south is down south, it's a lot of limestone. And it makes very fresh wines, but up north, where we see a lot of the fractured granite, we think we get greater complexity out of these particular soils. Wayne is going to focus on a couple of crus in specific. Moulin Avant certainly is one of those. Now, it's the gore, it's the pink granite that people always talk about, but there are also seams of manganese. Now, whether or not those seams of manganese, quote unquote, give flavor to the wine seems highly debatable. But what isn't debatable is manganese can be tough on grapevines, therefore they limit their yields, therefore they tend to focus more upon producing grapes than upon producing leaves. And therefore, Moulin Avant tends to be, we think, certainly a powerful and often age-worthy wine. The other differentiation here is that we're close enough to the river that the wind happens a lot more here. Things can warm up a great deal more. Now, size-wise, we're at about 1,800 acres with about 280 producers. And the fame of this area is such that when it was named in 1924, it was done so because there were so many people counterfeiting wines, trying to be as famous, if you will, as Moulin Avant. The other region that Wayne's going to taste and focus upon is the cru of Morgon. And specifically, we're going to get to taste a Côte de Pie. You can see it down in the center there. This is also a lot of the gore, the pink granite, also seams of manganese. But these wines often don't have quite the robustness of Moulin Avant. But you know what? It depends upon the producer. It depends upon the individual domain. Morgon is also quite a bit larger than Moulin Avant. It's about 2,700 acres with just under 300 producers or so. So you'll see a lot of variance and a lot of variety in this area as well. So let's talk to Wayne about some of these individual areas.
I love Beaujolais, first of all, and this is why. This has got, it's springtime, summertime in a glass. You get juicy fruit with the Morgon that's floral, and then raspberries and black cherries and some spices in there, and take a sip, and wow, it's an explosion of fruit and juiciness and brightness. And if you don't like this, you don't like wine. It's kind of like, why bother? Find another beverage, because this is enjoyable and a singularly, sensory, sensorily pleasant as any beverage gets. So.
Yeah, I think you're right about that for sure.
And it is a glass full of fruit and flowers, and it's got the spices and everything that one seeks. And it's not terribly tannic, but it's got substance, it's got body, it's got layers of flavor, and juicy and bright, everything you want in a Beaujolais.
And do you find Côte de Pie recognizably different from Morgon itself, or how do you feel about that?
A little bit. It got a little more density, a little more power. Morgon is always kind of round and ripe and juicy. The Côte de Pie has a bit more power, a bit more depth, another layer or two of complexity to it that makes it a more interesting drink. I've always loved this wine. Even before it was labeled Côte de Pie, it used to be just Jean d'Escombe back in my day. Now they've recognized that special spot in Morgon that produces really exceptional wine.
And what do you think of the claims, if you will, that the specific geology of Morgon or Côte de Pie is part of why those wines are they as they are?
Yes and no. As a geologist, I love talking about geology, and I've got rocks from Beaujolais, in my office here. And on the other hand, to say, because there's more quartz or the more feldspar, in the mix in the underlying granite. No, I don't think that is that much of a difference. I think the fact that it might be more fractured, which would lead to a more weathered soil and a different soil profile, different drainage profile, probably has more to do with it than the actual composition of the granite. Although in Moulin Avant they talk about manganese and that sort of thing, but trace minerals, I don't deny that these have a potential to make a difference. They talk about manganese and Barolo too, and maybe there's something about it that gives a special lilt to the flavors and aromas of the wines in those soils. And perhaps someday it will be confirmed or denied, but it's good to speculate on, and it's good people are looking that closely at the soils.
Yeah, for sure. And when it comes to manganese, I mean, it certainly makes it's makes growing vines a little more difficult. So maybe your yields will be slightly different. Maybe the plants will act slightly different because they're in a more challenging soil than otherwise,
Right.
than non-manganese soils.
So yeah, there's plenty of impacts. And is it the flavor of the soil? No, I don't believe that's true at all. But does a change in the rock type make a difference? Yes, it clearly does. And so, I mean, it changes a lot of nuances to the soil that change the environment that the roots grow in. So yeah, and anything that changes that has a potential to change the quality of the fruit. It's interesting because they're both Beaujolais and they're both deliciously Beaujolais. The Moulin Avant in my other glass here is more powerful, as the legend for Moulin Avant goes, and whereas the Morgon is flowers and fruit, there's more what I would call a meaty kind of smoky nuance to the Moulin Avant, and on the palate there's more power to that as well. I mean, it gives it just depth. I mean, it's not unapproachable at all. I mean, it's delicious. And had a lunch with dry rub barbecue ribs this afternoon with these two, and you taste them side by side and say, oh, this life is good. We've got but the Moulin Avant was wonderful with that, with the extra depth and a little bit more tannin. There's oak to it, so that gives it another layer of flavor and aroma that makes it a bit more interesting. But it leads me back to memories of my first Beaujolais tastings, and say, wow, this. Why don't people drink more of this? This is really good stuff, and there's something to be said for. I'm happy that it's more popular now, but back 20 years ago it was not at all. People said, oh, Beaujolais, that's a simple wine, only inexperienced drinkers would drink a Beaujolais, and they'd equate it with Nouveau, which back in the day didn't arrive in November. It arrived on a ship in December, not air freighted in. But long history. Well, I've always enjoyed Beaujolais, and I always for me, especially in the heartland here, Duboeuf was the Beaujolais. It was precious little else out there. A few other negociant Beaujolais-Villages or something, but when it came to discovering Cru Beaujolais and figuring out what Cru Beaujolais had to offer, Duboeuf was it. And then tasting the Jean d'Escombe and the Moulin Avant and the various Cru Beaujolais that Duboeuf offers was singular in my learning about Beaujolais and learning about the differences between Côte de Brouilly and Chiroume, and just enjoying the deliciousness that you can find through the different crus. There's certainly interesting styles, more breadth of style available when you talk about some of the smaller estates, but a lot of those can be kind of funky and not to everyone's taste. Beaujolais, whereas Duboeuf is still the standard in many ways for me for purity of flavor and difference between the crus, and you get more for your money when you step up from Beaujolais-Villages to a Cru Beaujolais, as you should. And there should be some distinction between tasting a Chiroume and tasting a Juliana and tasting the Moulin Avant, and there is. So I still enjoy when I have the opportunity to compare them side by side. And this is first time I've done it in a while, tasting a Morgon versus a Moulin Avant, and saying, well, both are the fuller side of Beaujolais, but there are differences. and they can be certainly appreciated for what both of them offer. I think to start, I would probably start comparing something that is just, Beaujolais AOC from the South, which is, on limestone, and then compare that with the Cru Beaujolais to get a sense of the depth and the nuance that you get from the finer crus. And, because they're largely granitic and soil type, whether you attribute that to the soil or maybe it's just the better exposure, uh, likely to be a combination of those two things, the perfect exposure, the right soil type, the right drainage and everything. So rather than trying to, parse the differences between Bruy and Cote de Bruy, try something from Beaujolais from the South that is clearly a different, uh, completely different sort of soil type, and compare that lightness and brightness that they certainly have to the added depth and nuance and layering that you get in the Cru.
Thanks for watching. When you come back, we're going to be talking about the culinary world of Beaujolais, the cuisine, understanding what it is that people eat when they drink Beaujolais.